welcome to, well, we don't actually have a name this week. We're currently in the process of a bit of a rebrand. So this week is nameless, and this was a great episode. We're also going to be a bit more specific about what is great about this episode. George.
So in this we talked a lot about having a process-based identity, identifying yourself with the things that you do versus identifying yourself as, these particular goals that you want to have in the future. And, the difference that can create, having this idea of, who you are being this distant thing in the future that's very different from who you are now, versus trying to find a way to really accept and be happy with who you are now, and kind of integrating those two things.
And I mean, I always like a chance to reflect on teenage anxiety. It's far enough away now that I find it quite fun. So yeah, we kind of got into that stuff as well, which was it's such an interesting time being a teenager, and the whole idea of identity and who we are feels so wrapped up in that time. So yeah, it was really nice to look into that as well. So really hope you enjoy the episode.
Let's get into it. The quote for this week is from Dale Carnegie, and it is, "Nobody is so miserable as one who longs to be somebody and something other than the person they are in body and mind." I think the first thing to really clarify is like, where is that misery coming from, and why would you feel that? And that is how I see it anyway. Your concept of who you are and your concept of who you should be. And I think it's important to clarify that these two things are both concept. They're not the full picture. They're not the entirety of your being. It's not like you fully know the entirety of yourself, and then you fully know the entirety of what you could be or what you should be doing, because your idea of who you are constantly is in flux, and so is your idea of what you should be and what you should be doing. And you might even have, things based on how you feel and how you've been raised, where you have conflicting ideas about what you should do. Like, you might have things that are completely opposite that you've still got in this idea of what you should and shouldn't do. So it can get really, really tangled and complicated, these two versions of who you think you are and who you think you should be. And that is different from, in meditation, just being with your awareness and just kind of going into that. That is a different thing. That's kind of, you could say that is you in a way, or like that's your complete experience, and you're kind of going into that. And you could say that, that is the most you that you can be. It is just completely immersing in that experience. But yeah, what this really is talking about is those two concepts and how they interact with each other. Generally speaking, the further away these two things are, the less happy you're going to be. Let's just say you think you should be hardworking and disciplined, but you feel like you're lazy. Those are two things where it sucks to have that conflict between those two things. And I think a big part of growing up and knowing yourself better is really starting to understand yourself and understanding some of your flaws. There's the flaws that you can just accept because, there's nothing you can really do to change them, or you've decided that for whatever reason, you're not willing to put in the effort to change them. And then there's the things about yourself where you might think, actually, I've got potential to change this. I could actually, say it's a fitness goal or something. You wanted to build strength or lose fat or whatever it was that you wanted to do. You could have this fitness goal and say, okay, actually, I want to be like this. I want to be different. I want to be like stronger or fitter in whatever way. And that is often in self-development seen as like a good thing of, never be satisfied with where you are, like always be striving to do better and be better. And, that mentality can help you achieve a lot. And it can also mean that you just don't feel as good about yourself. But then, the counter is, should you deserve to even feel good about yourself if you're just doing nothing? And I think, that's the main area that I'd kind of like to discuss in this episode. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there and nuance to your concept of yourself and how to construct that, which things to accept. And yeah, I think it's just a really interesting area to explore, and could have a a pretty big impact on just how happy you feel in general.
Before we get back to the episode, we just had a little request. Sharing is the only way that we are getting these episodes out there. So if you're enjoying this episode, what you can do is you can go onto whatever your podcast player is right now, press on our episode and just hit the share button, put it on Instagram, send it via email to someone that you like or WhatsApp. And that would just mean a huge amount to us, because that's how we're kind of spreading the podcast. And yes, please enjoy the rest of the episode. So when I was reading this quote, I really was thinking about this sense of ideas like, what are we born to do? What are our actual strengths fundamentally as a character, right? Like, so when we really honestly reflect on ourselves and think about who we are, and honestly is a big word, I think, kind of as you mentioned, because you can have very abstracted, like strange views of who you are based on self-esteem issues, etc., etc. But based on your actions and your core strengths, who are you? And I think that that's really fundamental to this quote, is like having a sense of what aspects of my character or my being are really core to me and even quite unique to me. And how can I be as in line with those things as possible? And this is something that I really had a lot of experience of in my life as someone that has, I think, experimented quite a lot with identity and trying to figure out who I am more fundamentally. I feel like a lot of my time has been spent on this question of, well, who am I though? I don't feel like I've been kind of just stumbling through life and just acting and reacting. And at times I've really envied people that seem to just move forward in that way and just work with what's there, that, you know, there's maybe not so much of the reflection, but there's other qualities that they have. But for me personally, reflecting on what is kind of foundational to who I am has been a big question since kind of my early teens, really. And I feel like I've been on both sides of this quote. So I've spent quite a lot of time longing to be somebody other than the person I am. And then I've spent quite a lot of time really trying to play to my strengths and work on those things that I know that I'm good at. And that's, thankfully, reflecting on the last kind of 3-4 years, I feel like I'm doing that, is seeing myself more clearly and thinking, okay, these are the qualities that I have. How can I work with this hand that I've been given? And in terms of the first part of experimenting and essentially, you know, longing to be someone that I'm not, I guess an example of this is definitely in secondary school and college. I was trying on a lot of different suits of personality. And I think one of the strongest ones for me was being quite reckless and being like a socialite. I really quite wanted to capture that as a person. I saw that there were people around me at secondary school and at college who were very almost impulsive, like quite charismatic and very, very social, lots of friends, always being invited to things, you know, kind of party animal. And I just so longed to be that person. And I invested a lot of energy trying to be that person. You know, and ways I'd do that would just be, you know, I'd be like challenging myself to talk to as many people as possible, as much of the time as possible, which has been a very like useful thing to experiment with. But I think it was more coming from a place of fear than genuine curiosity. You know, I was more frustrated at myself for not being like that naturally, and really just wanting to be the almost kind of the opposite of who I thought I was at the time, in turning much more impulsive. And I'm not an impulsive person. So, you know, coming back to kind of core characteristics, a core characteristic of me seemingly is to think about consequence and to be quite careful. There's really nothing wrong with that as a person. If you use that wisely, that is a strength 100%. But when I was younger, I just didn't see that as a strength, and I just didn't want that. I wanted to be impulsive. I wanted to be wild. And yet that was seemingly very opposing to what's quite fundamental to who I am. So that's one end. And then on another end, it's like reflecting more on my strengths, you know, so just kind of running with that idea of being a bit more conscientious and considerate and careful. It's like character traits like that, when they're not played to, when they're not used in a positive way, say at the point when I wasn't accepting the fact that I was more considerate and more careful would be a hesitancy, a fearfulness to try things and experiment. That would be like the negative side of those qualities when I wasn't playing to them. But when I've really been working with them, of course, like being considerate, it's like being considerate of consequence and other people. It's like that means that I can be empathetic. It means that I can be very vigilant. If I'm working on projects, I can really be aware of like the different elements of those projects and notice things that other people can't notice. But these are things that I've had to train at and work with. It just happens to be that the foundations of them were always there. So I've like learning to then kind of play to them. And there's so much less suffering in that mode of looking at what is really at the root of seemingly the real patterns that I have, and then working to those, and also recognizing like I'm never going to be an impulsive person. I'm never going to be a reckless person. I can play with those things, and I can enjoy the company of people who are like that. That doesn't seem to be at the root of who I am. So striving to be that person has caused me a lot of grief and suffering, trying to kind of morph and squeeze myself into a different fit. So that's kind of what I was thinking about with this.
Because all of that time where you're thinking about being someone else or thinking you should be a different way, you're basically saying like there's something wrong with me. Like I'm not how I should be. And there's no way that's going to be an enjoyable experience to be consistently feeling that. And it's something that I think I've been doing more recently. And I'm in quite a good position. I feel like I've got quite a lot of good things going for me just in terms of my like daily life and stuff. I think it's, I've got things fairly dialed. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect or, like whatever that even means. But like I've definitely been working to that more of like really accepting where I am now and just enjoying that. And I think a little trick that you can kind of do is attach yourself to the identity of someone following a process. So say with a fitness goal, for example, you wanted to build your strength to a particular level. Then rather than saying like, oh, I'm weak now and I want to be strong, it'll be much better when I'm strong. You can really like make that identity about like, I'm someone who makes sure that I'm healthy every day. Like I'm making sure that I'm like eating well and exercising, and that can be your identity. And when you make your identity part of that process of someone who is moving towards a particular goal, that's going to be your daily thing that you're focused on. And, each day can really be a success because you've moved towards a particular goal, or you've just lived in the way that you've said is important to live. Say if it's, it's to do with health. So I think that is a nice kind of reframe, a way to think about it, and just to remind yourself, because it's so natural. Like you'll keep creating this split of striving, or you'll notice something in particular in your life that's not right. You're always going to find those things. It's a discipline to be able to still work to improve your life in all sorts of different ways, but to actually enjoy the process of that and not feel that you're going to be happy once you've done all that stuff, or that there's going to be this point where you reach becoming, the ultimate version of yourself or whatever. And that really is about right now. And just the easiest way to say, if you want in a month's time to be like really happy and accepting of yourself, the best way isn't to like hustle like mad and do you know what I mean? Just be like, oh, I'm going to make it so that I'm like do all this stuff for a month. The best way to do that is to like today is to like really, appreciate where you're at today, because that's, you're really training yourself to feel that, to feel, more complete and have less of a fragmented sense of identity, which can really do what this quote is saying, which can really be quite a miserable experience, and something that, because you get so used to it, it can just become completely habitual, and you might not even realize that it's possible to live a different way. And yeah, it is much nicer when you do, or when you can, it's something that's not like a complete black or white. Like I was saying, it's like the bigger that distance, the more you're reinforcing that distance between who you think you are and who you think you should be. That is going to really exacerbate it. The only time where you're going to get those two things completely aligned is really through something like meditation, when you're completely not even thinking about future goals or how things should be or how you wish the current moment was different. You're just completely accepting of exactly this moment. And, that's not a state that you can just live in because you just starve. Like, you can't just be sat there completely perfectly content with the present moment forever. At least as far as I've found, I haven't been able to do that. But it's a nice way to get an insight into that mode of being through doing meditation and stuff like that. That can really make you appreciate that moment and realize that, there's nothing wrong with this present moment, even if there might be discomfort or whatever. And I think, that's something that will help train you to generally be more accepting and more happy with how things are now. And, from that place, you can still be building healthy habits or whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah, I like the point about, being less goal focused and more process focused. It makes sense that so little time is spent fulfilling a goal in that, actually getting to the completion point. So if it's a constant, because essentially like an idea of, if you're completely goal focused, as in you want to be this other person, that's your goal. You want to be this other person. You're only going to be happy when you the other person. Then that in itself is a training, and the training says what you are now is wrong, and it's only going to be right at a particular point in time in the future. So even when that point does arrive, if it ever does arrive, if it's even possible for it to arrive, then that momentum of feeling like elsewhere is where you need to be, it continues to run. It's not like there's been no training of self-acceptance. A lot of what this quote talks about, I think, is about self-knowledge. It's not just whatever's here at the moment, accept that. If you're fucking, say with me, say like, you've got a tech addiction, you're just on your phone all the time, it's okay. You just need to accept where you are. Because on some level you do, right? But I don't think that this quote is pointing towards that, whatever shit habits you've got at the moment, that's cool, that's fine. You needn't do anything about them. I think this quote is much more talking about the person you are in body and mind. The person you are in body and mind isn't addicted to tech. That's not foundational to who you are in body and mind. But finding out who you really are, like what your qualities truly are in your depths, I think that's what it's kind of pointing towards. And I think that's not easy to work out, basically. It's a lifelong process of self-discovery to work out what is foundational to who I am in a positive sense. What are the cards that I've been dealt in my character from very, very early on that I can work with, and that might be like that you are particularly athletic, or you're very charismatic and you love to socialize. It might not be at this very moment in time you feel that is true. You can definitely have someone that is very extroverted, very friendly and outgoing in their core, that is not expressing that currently in their life. But it's true somewhere deeper down, and it's about working out, like, that obviously there are this process of self-discovery of really working out who you are. Yeah, it's a long process, and I think there's a lot of different methods to it. Like one really interesting one that I was kind of thinking of with this quote is like, what did people reflect to you about you when you were a child? What kind of qualities were picked up by other people, parents, friends, and that point in which you're unfiltered, you're a child, you're not thinking about trying to squeeze your identity in any particular shape. You're just getting on with it, and you're just acting. Like, what were you like then? Were you very curious? Were you very sporty? You just were like, but outside all the time? Were you in nature all the time? Were you already a kind of deep thinker then? The qualities that you have at that point when you are unfiltered, children are naturally unfiltered. There are obviously certain circumstances where that wouldn't be the case, but by and large, it's like children don't have that filter. So who were you then? And that can really say something about what's core to you. I can definitely notice when my parents have talked about qualities that I had as a child, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, that's definitely still there. I really feel like that is quite foundational to who I am. And there's obviously like loads of ways, through therapy, through meditation, through journaling, through feedback from other people. Like, what do your friends say about you? What do they really feel that you're like? And these things point to the person you really are in body and mind. And then the flip side of that, what are you really not? What are you currently wrestling with and just trying to mold yourself into a particular shape that just is ill-fitting? It just doesn't feel right. You know, like it's I find myself doing that all the time. It's kind of like, I think particularly with kind of social stuff, it's like I'm trying to be perceived in a certain way that just doesn't really feel like me. I think it's like, I think like that person, you know, that walks into the room and it's just like, they just hug everyone and they're like really loud and really funny all the time. And they make everyone feel like super welcome and all of this kind of stuff. It's just like, they're like proper kind of hosts. You know, they like really exude that kind of energy. I'm the guy in the corner, like having a deeper conversation with one person, you know, like I'm much more likely to be doing that. So there's not any point of me like really trying to be that person who's like the life and soul of the party. I think we talked about this before, but like, you know, we've all got our equivalents of that, like in the workplace or whatever. Like, what are you trying to be that you kind of know somewhere is just not who you are? And is there pain in that yearning to be someone else? Well, from that, like kind of a personal question for you. I was just wondering if you found that you've tried on different suits or different personalities for periods. You know, I know that you've done that for fun before, but you know, like, and you know, we can talk about that, but I'm also interested to hear if you've spent any time trying on different Georges as a way of like feeling more complete, you know, like I do want to be someone else actually, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've definitely done it with social things as well. Although interesting, like from you know, just being more outgoing in social situations, like I have really found that, like, you know, I can be more extroverted than I thought I kind of was naturally at one point. You know, I do, you know, in some contexts quite enjoy being a little bit loud and obnoxious and like messing around and joking about and just being like very silly. And like, I do actually like really genuinely enjoy doing that a lot of times. And that was something where I would struggle to do that because I would feel too self-conscious to do it, perhaps, you know, care too much about how I'm perceived by other people. So it's definitely worth it to actually explore these things. Like, don't let this hold you back. So say if you're someone who's shy, you know, you see yourself as shy, it doesn't mean that you're like, okay, I'm just a shy person, I'm just not going to talk to people. It's really important, I think, to actually play with things which are the opposite side of the spectrum to you, because only when you do that, you can truly find where you are. You know, say if it is something like introversion or extroversion, that's where you can really, and you're going to be different in different situations, but like that's where you can really find where you are. Like, where are you most happy and most comfortable? Because it might not actually be where you started. There might be particular things of how your parents were, or to do with your siblings or your peers at school or nursery, and how they treated you, that may have led you to either be more or less introverted. So it might be that, you know, how you feel you are is not actually the most true representation of your character. More of it is based on the nurture. And, you know, that's the thing of nature versus nurture. I think there is a lot that can be nurture, but really getting to know yourself, I feel like you get closer to your nature. You get closer to actually, you know, biologically what is most suits you. And, you know, you're still going to be slightly flavored by how you've been raised and stuff. And that's going to hopefully help you really bring out, you know, your natural qualities. Ideally, you know, you want to, you know, learn to really embrace those qualities that you have, rather than be raised in a way where you feel like you need to repress certain parts of your personality and your being. Yeah, I've definitely played around with different things throughout, you know, especially like teenage sort of times, trying to be different in different ways. And I think that that's a good thing to do. I really think it's good in a way to not just accept how you think you are, but to play around with different things. But in a playful way. I think that's really important to get to a happier place of really knowing who you are and living in accordance with your true traits, you know, your real strengths, and really learning what are the things that you're just not, that just don't really work for you, and giving them a fair shot before you decide, oh, I'm just not that sort of person, or I'm just not like that.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of this quote, is that it's kind of all well and good to say, you know, don't be someone else, be yourself. But a lot of us just don't know who we are, you know, including me. It's like there's still a lot more of that experimentation to come, really, to find out, am I the extroverted person actually? Because I know when I feel most at ease, I am extroverted. When I feel completely relaxed, then it's like, yeah, I'm happy to be the attention being on me, or to be leading a group doing something. Like, I'm cool with that, you know, that's fine. I wonder where, I guess the skill is being really receptive, because there might be fear coming up for a certain way of being, but that's not necessarily an indication that it's not who you are in a deeper sense, you know. But there can be a lot of layers of social conditioning and stuff that's in the way of who you are. It's a lifelong process of becoming receptive to really get a sense of when something really clicks into place and you're like, yeah, that's definitely, I mean, you know, this podcast is an example. I think it's like, we've been doing this over a year now. It's like, it's something that we both care about, and these conversations are stuff that we were having this before the podcast began, and we definitely didn't come into doing podcasting on a whim of like, oh, this is like a fleeting thing, we might be interested in having these sorts of conversations, and then it sort of just goes off and we get into something else. It's like having these kind of conversations where you're really trying to like unpick how stuff fits together, particularly kind of psychologically. That's just in there. I would say that's part of who I am. That's part of who you are, because we're at ease now and it's fun, and we've continued to do it. The proof's in the pudding. Like, it's something we've kept on coming back to, haven't let slide. And I mean, it's been there as long as I can remember in my own life. You know, I remember like going to parties as a teenager and just being desperate to have deeper conversations with people, like really, and occasionally it would happen and it would be fucking amazing. But I was always, even to the point of like, if someone was upset, I'd want to speak to them because I just felt like it might be more real and we might actually be able to talk about the deeper stuff in their life. And I wanted to talk about that. I was so fucking keen to do it. But that really isn't in everyone. You know, like there was other people at those same parties. It's just like, who are born performers, you know, and in the most positive sense, like they can entertain and include people in like such a masterful way. And that you can just see from being a teenager, like that's in them, is to kind of include and like create these sort of performances that's like, you know, people love that, people enjoy that so much, you know. And I saw that and it's just like, that's part of them. But getting them into a situation where they can, like, ultimately, if they got through the fear of talking about what's really going on for them, they might carry it on to an extent, but it's not, they definitely wouldn't have a podcast about it. You know, like they might talk about their own stuff for a little bit and then they would kind of go off and do something that they really enjoy doing, you know, so yeah, I think it's just like, it's a perfect example. What we're doing right now is something that we've repeatedly come back to, and the evidence of the fact that it's very foundational to who we are is that we're not doing it out of fear. It's just happening very naturally. And it's just it feels like a very honest, natural expression. And I think that's probably a quality of that kind of natural expression. When the fear isn't there, what feels natural to you? What really feels, yeah, this works. Something about this works, you know?
Awesome. Well, that seems like a good place to move on to next week's quote. What have you got for us?
The quote that I picked for next week is by a spiritual teacher called 𝗢𝗀𝗿𝗄. I've been on retreat with 𝗢𝗀𝗿𝗄 a number of times, and she's a bit of a mentor, really. Yeah, she's great. So we can talk a bit more about her next week. But the quote that I've picked goes as follows. The word radical comes from the Latin radix, which means root. Any radical act must get down to the root of things, which often lies below the surface, is hidden from view, taken for granted, yet is ultimately essential for existence.
Nice.
Lots to chew on. Chew on that root.
Sweet. Have a good week.
Have a good week.